Morning, everybody. I'm back in the saddle again. Back in my car. It's back from the shop. I learn Mishnayos every day, and to the point where I learn 3 chapters a day. I'm not saying this to brag. I'm saying you can do this too. There's this app on the phone, the Kahati app. You can chaperein. It holds on to your Mishnah where you are. I remember a tape from Rabbi Weinberger back in the old days, and he said, Chapa Mishnah. It was, if you're at work and instead of talking over by the the water cooler, right? No, Chapa Mishnah, and you could also talk by the water cooler and also Chapa Mishnah. That's the truth. You could do Efshet L'Kayim Shneim, but in any event, Baruch Hashem, for a few years now, every day, 3 prakim of Mishnayos a day. I have so much thanks to Kodesh Baruch Hu that I'm almost again, a little over a month, I should finish Shas Mishnayos again, and also Mirz Hashem finish Shas Bavli a second time. But Shas Mishnayos, I don't know how many times I've finished. Twice a year for I don't know how many years, finishing the whole Shas Mishnayos. And it's an incredible thing. And I've finished Shas Mishnayos before that too. So I don't have a whole number of how many times I finished Shas Mishnayos. But it's a wonderful thing. And the thing is, you get from Mishnayos the basics. This is what really, if you really know how to learn Mishnayos, and this is what Judaism really is, and you also get a clear hashkafa. You get to see how our Chazal thought, which is so important, how our sages thought, and it clears up a lot of other issues, even though obviously there's a lot more than what's in the Mishnayos. But almost everything else is built on those 2 foundations of the scripture, the Torah, Nevi'im, Ksuvim, that they call Tanakh, and the Mishnah. To the point where the Kabbalah, Hashkafa, Musar, Hasidus is really built on these 2 foundations. And of course the Gemara is obviously built on the foundation of the Mishnayos. And I think when you come down to fundamental ideology, obviously there are more things that surround it that can be added to it. But the fundamental, both in halacha and ideology, in hashkafa, in law and in lore, we have many different ideas in Judaism that get inflated. And it's important to get to the basics, to understand the basics. It doesn't mean we have to necessarily reject the quote, what I'm calling inflation, but we have to understand what is being inflated. What is the fundamental? And when it comes to Eretz Yisrael, when it comes to the Holy Land, and what does it mean, the Holy Land? This Mishnah is central to that. Now, I've heard people say, well, there's more to it than that. Okay. But this is central in our halachic understanding, and should also be central, therefore, in our hashkafic understanding as well, because halacha should color our hashkafa, should inform, at least, our ideology. And when there's all this romantic ideology about the Holy Land, poetic ideology about the Holy Land, we have to get to the basics first. Meaning, we have to understand, what is that poetry reflecting on? What is that poetry opining about? Teaching us about? And without this fundamental, all of that poetry is meaningless. And it becomes dangerous. because there is a lot of misunderstanding that leads to foreign ideologies, that many people of Jewish extraction have grabbed onto ideologies from the late 1800s of nationalism that are not founded in Torah. And so often it's because the translations of words wind up getting misunderstood as the time goes on. And so we have a Hebrew word and we translate into English. We have to understand that translation is really a code for something deeper. I'm not saying that necessarily we have to abandon a lot of these translations. I'm a very traditionalist in English as well. I'm fluent in Yiddish and in Hebrew and in Aramaic, but I specifically go out of my way when speaking, particularly on YouTube or to excuse me, most general audiences, to try to limit the amount of Jewish words that I use and keep traditional words in English, because it evokes a certain amount of feeling and so forth. But nonetheless, you hear a word like nation or people, and and that has a certain connotation that developed in the 19th century that really, in a sense, didn't even exist before that. And it was because of the secularization of the world. And while we can argue back and forth about the positive and negative aspects of secularization, the fact is it is. I believe very much in being pragmatic. But nonetheless, don't let our ideology get lost through, we don't lose the forest through the trees, And also we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, but the other way around, we don't drown the baby in the bathwater either. And that is, and so often people are so unflexible and they push one way or the other. They either want to throw out the baby with the bathwater or they want to drown the baby in the bathwater. And we have to find the proper balance. And we maintain that balance by being attached to Torah as Jews. And to Torah, it means both Torah Shebiksav and Torah Shebal Peh, both the written Torah and the oral Torah. And when it comes to the oral Torah, the main depository of the oral Torah is the Mishnah. And it's so important to be a baki in Mishnayos that it's worthwhile to learn quickly through the Mishnayos, if you especially know how to learn a little bit, and even to the point where some people finish the whole Shas Mishnayos every month, right? They learn 18 chapters a day. I've done that once or twice. Finish the whole Mishnah in a month. It's really not that difficult if you really put yourself to it. I mean, it doesn't have to take away from other things. You can still make time to learn Gemara, to learn Halacha, to learn Tanakh and everything else. Probably a good thing to do during Shovavim, to be honest. Maybe Chodesh Shvat, or maybe once I don't know. I have to think about it. Or even if it means to do 9 parakim a day and to finish in 2 months, also it's nicht gefährlich, As it is now, I'm usually finishing in 6 months the whole Shas Mishnayos twice a year, just about. It's not exactly 6 months, but it's. And I'm not saying this to brag. I'm saying this that's quite easy to do, and you can do it. But let's get to what we want to learn. I've already spoke for 10 minutes. In fact, it might even be worthwhile to make this a separate video, but let's just learn this Mishnah and then move on. I want to make one more video, and I usually do my learning during the commute, so at least enough of it that I'm prepared. Today's holiday, Choga in the state, so I don't really have to go to work. I'm going to work anyway. I need to get out of the house. I find a lot of peace at work, to be honest. But the greatest place to find peace is in learning Torah, and I find also it's a conducive atmosphere to learning, especially on a day like this. And we're going to talk about that in another video. That for sure will make a separate video. Anyway, let's learn this Mishnah, because this is, so many people think that Eretz Yisrael means something mystical, and it does. I'm not saying it doesn't, but you got to get to the roots. You cannot have the mystical without the foundation of Nigla and of the revealed Torah, so to speak. And so many people, because this is a Seder Taurus, it's not something people tend to learn. Talmidei Chachamim know this Mishnah, but the Hamon Am, they're not learning this Mishnah so much, so they're losing out. And really, the Hamon Am should know Mishnayos. Every Yid should know Mishnayos. Particularly, at least you go through it, and when it's an interesting Mishnah, all the Mishnayos are interesting, but I'm saying something that has ideology attached to it. I've said I want to make an En Yankov for the Mishnayos, because there's so much fundamental. I've said this for 20 years that I want to make an En Yankov for the Mishnayos, and here I haven't done it yet. But who am I to do it? But at least to put it together. But how do I decide which ones? If I just go by whatever the Ein Yankov had a Mishnah, Chvais, But so let me learn. Asek to shows Hain. There are 10 levels of holiness. Eretz Yisrael mikudeshes mikol ha'aratzos. The land of Israel is sanctified more than all the other lands. That's the meaning of the words there. Even though literally it means it is sanctified from all the lands. Which also, obviously, the idiom means the same thing in a simple meaning. But in a deeper meaning, the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael, in a sense, we could say, and a lot of people would not want to say that the holiness of the Holy Land comes from the other lands. In whatever, Ein Melech B'lei Am. And in the very simplest way, there would be no musag, there would be no understanding, no concept of a Holy Land if there were not lands that were less holy. But also, it's a fascinating thing. Eretz Yisrael mikudeshes mikol ha'aratzos. The Eretz Yisrael is more holy than all other lands. Doesn't say the other lands are not holy. So again, we can also make those drushes, but we have to get to the simple meaning. So, all right. But in any event, all right. So shkoyach. What does it mean it's holy? Because, with all due respect, and I have a lot of respect for the other indigenous peoples and other lands, and they have their ideas of holiness, and the ideas of sacred land, and they see their sacred lands being abused, and how hurtful that is to these other peoples, right? But it's really not our business right now. That's not what the Mishnah is thinking about. But the fact that it uses that term leaves room for that respect. That it's holier than all other lands leaves room for the idea that other lands are holy too. But then the Mishnah modifies this by explaining Umahi Kedushasa, and what is her holiness. What is the holiness of the Holy Land? What makes it the Holy Land? Is it because the Christians and the Muslims and the Jews all think that this is a special land? Is it because the Bible was there, and the Bible was in other lands too? The Bible tells us of Egypt and Persia and Babylonia as well. So what is it about the Holy Land? What makes it the Holy Land? Right? And this is where it might be disappointing, but it's true, and it's actually uplifting and important and fundamental. So the holiness of the Holy Land is not some feeling that you have when you're there, which anybody who's been there, you feel it. But then it's funny, I'll tell you the truth, because right, Al Derech Hasidus, they say, Reb Nachman of Breslov, the Heilige Tzaddik, Rabbi Nachman, he said that the kever of his grandfather, the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, right, is Bechinas Eretz Yisrael. It's conceptually Eretz Yisrael. It has it's an archetype of Eretz Yisrael, but it's not. It doesn't have the kedusha of Eretz Yisrael. Well, there's a story that one of the Gedolei Ador, Rav Moshe Wolfson Shlita, he should be well. He was by Lubavitcher Rebbe's Chonrocha, and the last one who called himself Lubavitcher Rebbe. And Lubavitcher Rebbe, he said to Mashgiach, to Rav Moshe Wolfson Shlita, Badal Chaim Tovim, he said, "Did you just come from Eretz Yisrael?" And Lubavitcher Rebbe never visited Eretz Yisrael. And Rav Moshe Wolfson spends a lot of time in Eretz Yisrael. He spends the whole summer there. And Rabbi Wolfson said, "No, I just came from New Square, which is a village in upstate New York in Rockland County that's all Jewish." So then Lubavitcher Rebbe said, "Oh, there's an Indian of Eretz Yisrael there, a Bechina of Eretz Yisrael." He might have used the word Kedusha, I don't know, but certainly that if he did, he meant it colloquially and not halachically, because now we're going to learn what is the true Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael, not in any Hasidic sense. And I've been a Hasidic Shahid, but you have to understand. I love Hasidism, but you have to understand the difference between logos and mythos, and archetypes and so forth. How it's not, you cannot, you have to maintain that balance, So the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael is not like that, halachically speaking, and it's nothing nationalistic. It's not the falafel or the hatikva or the blue and white flag, chas v'shalom, the havdil. That's certainly not the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael. That's the tumah of Eretz Yisrael. So what is it? Umahi Kedushasah. What is the holiness of Eretz Yisrael? Shemevi'in mimena ha'omer v'habikurim u'shtei halachem, that you bring from it the omer, that you can bring from there these sacrifices that were brought in the temple in ancient times. The omer on the second day of Passover, the bikurim, the first fruits. Omer is a barley offering brought on the second day of Passover that permits all the other offerings, all other grains to be eaten, meaning the grain, at least in the Holy Land, or maybe in other lands as well, is prohibited until the Omer is brought, or until the time that the Omer would be brought, right? And that's what we call Yashan and Chadash, and there's a whole question whether that applies outside the Holy Land, or if it does apply outside the Holy Land, only applies to Jewish farms. And so there's all these, or whether it applies all times everywhere. Whatever it is, there are different opinions. The Omer is the actual offering that was brought in the temple, or before that in the tabernacle. That was brought as barley offering, and it had to be brought from the Holy Land. You could not bring barley from Egypt or from Libya or from Syria or from Lebanon, right? You could only bring it from Eretz Yisrael, and it had to be actually Eretz Yisrael. You couldn't bring it from Eilat either, right? Bikurim, the first fruits, which would be brought on Shavuos, on Pentecost. Ushtei Alechem, and also on Shavuos, on Pentecost, there were 2 loaves of bread that were offered as sacrifices. It was the only time it was really a chometz offering, that it was a leavened offering. So these 3 offerings, which are all connected, incidentally, because after the Omer is brought, we count 49 days, and then the 50th day of Shavuos when you could bring the other 2. And so they're intimately, the second 2 are brought on Shavuos, and the first one is what brings about Shavuos. And so and we could talk about what that means about Matan Torah, and about Yetzias Mitzrayim being connected to Matan Torah, all these other things. But again, we could discuss that at some point. Meaning there are other things, there are other offerings, but these in particular had to be brought from Eretz Yisrael. And then Umash She'en Mevin Kain Mikol Haratzos. And these are not brought from any other lands. And then the Mishnah goes on to talk about the holiness of Jerusalem. And again, why don't we learn that Mishnah too? The cities that are walled have more holiness than the rest of Eretz Yisrael. Because we send out the lepers. Again, this doesn't mean Hansen's disease. It means the ones that are discussed in Leviticus. And then also they could carry a dead body around until they decide what to do with it. But once it leaves, it doesn't come back, and there are no cemeteries within the walls of a walled city, any walled city. And then it says, inside of the walls, specifically of Jerusalem. This is not all walled cities. This is now the walls of Jerusalem, right? Kudash Mehem, that is holier than all the other walled cities. Because there you eat the sacrifices that could be eaten outside the temple, can only be eaten within the walls of Jerusalem. And also there you can consume the second tithe, which every other year, the 6 years of the 7-year cycle, not including the sabbatical year, there's a second tithe that you had to bring the food, or essentially sell the food and take the money, meaning you transfer the holiness of that food onto money. You make a pidyon, is what we call it. You redeem that, the redemption of the holiness onto the money, and use that money to buy food that could only be eaten within the walls of Jerusalem. Again, These are laws about the Holy Land and the holiness of the Holy Land, the holiness of Jerusalem. This isn't a nationalist idea. This is a religious idea. These are religious laws. And when these things don't exist, they don't exist. And so essentially, a lot of these things really don't matter today. If we're not bringing the Shtei Alechet, if we're not bringing the Omer, if we're not bringing the Bikurim, if there is no Beis HaMikdash, if there is no temple, and we're not bringing these sacrifices, there really is no holiness of Eretz Yisrael that we need to really be concerned with. And if there are no Kedoshim Kalim, there is no Meiser Sheni. There could be Meiser Sheni, but you have to be in a state of purity, and we're not in that state of purity. Even though we do observe the Meiser Sheni, but we just let it, we put it on the money, and then we could throw a coin into the Dead Sea or something like that. We don't do it. And so a certain aspect of the holiness of Jerusalem becomes more historical than actual. Har Habayis Mekudesh Mimenu, the Temple Mount, is holier than the holiness of the rest of the walls of Jerusalem, the city within the walls. And this actually applies today. And you have to show that respect, even though the temple is in ruin. And that's the reason why most pious Jews don't ascend to the Temple Mount, although some do, and they have what to rely on, but they have to be careful for these things. So Har Habayis Mekudesh Mimenu, the Temple Mount is holier than all the rest of the city of Jerusalem. The walls within the walls of the city, what we call the old city, although the old city is not the original walls, and we could discuss whether the Temple Mount winds up being on the eastern side of the old city, and would actually the original walls were almost the opposite. So anyway, that winds up further west within the actual original city. But so whether or not it's these walls or the original walls, we'll leave that aside for now. But in any event, Temple Mount, we know what that is. She'ein zaven zavos nidos v'yoldus nechnasim l'sham. And there on the Temple Mount, people who have a discharge that is abnormal, something akin to gonorrhea, they don't enter at all the Temple Mount. It's not just a Balkari, not someone who has a normal discharge, but an abnormal discharge. That's the Zava and the Zava, the male and the female. And then the Nidos V'Yoldos, and these are the natural ones, the woman who had her period, and she has to count 7 days. The Zava has to count 7 clean days, and so nowadays we're machmir for a nida like a Zava. But in biblical law, it's the seven days from when she has the flow. She could already go to the mikveh, then she could go to the Temple Mount. That, even though that's a natural and normal occurrence, the oldest, and also when woman had a baby, the same thing. She has to count the days. It's more for a female than a male. We all know that these. So she'ein zavim zavos nidos v'yoldus nechnasim l'sham. These people who have these discharges from their body cannot enter there until they've been cleansed from this discharge to go to mikveh, and if they need to count a certain amount of days and so forth before they can go to the mikveh, they are not allowed to enter into the entire Temple Mount, and so therefore the single girls who don't go to the mikveh, they should not be going on the Temple Mount, and the women who have these issues, they should go to the Temple Mount, and the men, the actual halachic idea of the Zava don't apply so much, but some say that could be certain aspects. Certainly, a man has to go to mikveh before he can go up to the Temple Mount. Both a man or a woman have to go to the mikveh before going to the Temple Mount. Now, and there certainly are aspects of Temple Mount that once you go to the mikveh, you're allowed to go into. The question is the next part. Achel mekudesh mimenu. How do they translate the chel? It just says chel. So it's another aspect of the Temple Mount. It's holier than that. She'ein goyim t'mei meis nechnasim l'sham. Gentiles cannot go there, and anyone who is impure by contact to the dead cannot go there, which means everybody. Because if you even passed under, if you ever visit a cemetery, you cannot remove that impurity without the red heifer, without the ashes of the red heifer. So we don't have that, and so therefore, wherever the chel is, we cannot go. Nobody can go, neither Jew nor Gentile, because every Jew has a din of tamei meis. And as ras noshim mekudeshes mimenu, the women's area, the women's gallery is holier than that. She'ein tful yoim nichnas l'sham. So meaning, if someone went to the mikveh and they need to go to the mikveh, but they didn't wait till nightfall, they could go up onto the Temple Mount. Meaning, it's enough to just go onto the basic area of the Temple Mount, just to go to the mikveh. If unless you're a zav or a zavar, and neither your lettuce, and certainly not. But once you get to Ezra's Noshim, then you have to have the full purity of not only immersing in the mikveh, but waiting till nightfall. But if one would go there as a Tvul Yom, then he would not be liable to bring a sin offering, as Shom Kedeshes Mimena Shein Mechusik Purim Nichnas L'Sham. The courtyard of Israel is holier than that. That someone who lacks the atonement of a certain sacrifice cannot enter them. And if you do, you are liable to bring a sin offering. The priest's courtyard is holier than that. That a non-priest, a regular Israelite, cannot enter there unless he needs to bring a sacrifice. The smicha l'shchita l'snufa, to press down on the sacrifice, the animal, and to slaughter it, and to wave it around. And for those things, sometimes the non-priest has to be there for that. All right. It goes more, but these are the things that are applicable today, really. So thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe, comment. But the point is that the holiness of the Holy Land is more of a legal definition than an ideological or mystical or poetic one. And as much as we can enjoy the mystical and the poetic, which are really the same thing, don't lose out the logos through the mythos. This is an area where so much of the Klal Yisrael emphasizes the mythos and ignores the logos, and we can't do that. We have to have the balance. Thank you so much for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe, comment, and we'll see you later. Doesn't mean that we have to abandon the mythos, but it has to be a healthy mythos, and we have to know the difference between mythos and logos. We were talking about other mythologies and other cultures. Those two have to be approached in a healthy manner. All right. That you got what I'm saying, right? All right. Thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe. Comment. We'll see you later.